Barrett. I hope you're having a good day. Welcome into the game in Tuscaloosa.
I'm doing great, Ryan. No, I think Charles Barkley described it as best as possible before the game even started on game day when he said it wasn't the kick six, it was the kick.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. That's legitimately what happened.
It was. But I guess my point of the conversation, and certainly I want to go back to looking at this Auburn game. I mean, how did we get here? How did Alabama look this bad from your perspective? And give us your analysis, the way that you sort of saw the game unfold.
It was two things. One, it should not be surprising. If it's surprising, it's because the aura of invincibility got built up around Alabama again. And what do I say on your show all the time? Alabama's not invincible. They lose games every year, and they're flawed. And what happened was they ran into a better Auburn football team top to bottom than Alabama. And it is. Now, it's not more talented, but it's better. Nick Saban got out-coached by Gus Malzahn, and more specifically, Auburn's strength, the best parts of its team, directly played into the weakest parts of Alabama's team. So from a matchup perspective, it was just a nightmare going in for Alabama. I said this on your show. I wrote this on CBS last week. Alabama did not match up well at all against Auburn, and Auburn exposed that because, quite frankly, aside from the first drive of the second half, Alabama couldn't do anything. They couldn't do anything offensively, and they couldn't do anything defensively.
Barrett, when I look at this Crimson Tide team, just look at it from a perspective, okay? And if you want to take and just single out an Auburn game, certainly it opened our eyes there. But even Mississippi State, Texas A&M, this doesn't look like your typical Nick Saban Alabama team that we've come to know in the 10 years, 11 years under Nick Saban. I mean, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree with that, but I don't know if that's necessarily a terrible thing because, I mean, let's be real about what this team really was. It was a young team. We all knew. We talked about it before the summer, Ryan, on your show at SEC Media Days, how, replacing Tim Williams and Ryan Anderson and Dalvin Tomlinson and John, at some point it's going to catch up to Alabama, right? I remember specifically having that conversation with you. At some point, you can't just say, okay, we're going to trot out Johnny Five-Star and he's going to go be a stud instantaneously. That's not how that works. And that's, I think, the crux of what happened to Alabama this year is that you had a lot of uncertainty that was sort of, I wouldn't say disguised. You flat out athleted a lot of really good teams, but when the time came to play teams that were comparable to you from an athletic standpoint, or who have a little bit more experience, like a Texas A&M from an athlete standpoint, is not at Alabama's level, but it's somewhat getting there. Mississippi State, I think, was far more experienced, and that's why they had so much success. And Auburn, from a coach, from an experience and from an athletic standpoint, is equal to or better than Alabama. So you just had those problems get exposed, and they got exposed in previous games, in games in which Alabama still found ways to win. They couldn't do it against Auburn because just flat out Auburn's a comparable talent-wise, significantly a better coach in that game and more experience. And again, the weaknesses of Alabama got exposed. Their offensive line was not that good all year. Their defensive front was thin. What does Auburn do best? They expose defensive fronts that do not have eye discipline and are young and inexperienced and thin. And at the same time, their defensive line is amazing and exposed Alabama's offensive line for what it was, which is just sort of an average offensive line.
But just from a physicality standpoint, it showed up against Texas A&M. Texas A&M out-physicaled Alabama on the fronts. Mississippi State whipped them in Starkville from a physicality standpoint on line of scrimmage. LSU, in some ways, did the same. Auburn completely just dominated. And Barrett, they didn't do anything confusing on that front. I mean, they really just brought four guys and just absolutely took the beat to the Crimson Tide.
They did. I mean, and I think that's something that I think a lot of schools and a lot of coaches saw on tape throughout the course of the year. I think when Texas A&M did that, they did it to an extent, right? So it wasn't as pronounced as it was in November. But I mean, when Alabama played LSU, Dave Aranda saw something. Dave Aranda basically said, "We're bringing the house, and we're gonna wear down this offensive line," and they did it. And then Mississippi State had no qualms and was not intimidated at all on either line of scrimmage by what Alabama did. So I think that teams recognized that there were problems and that Alabama, while they were winning games, they were vulnerable. And that's true. They are. They're not the best team in the SEC West. I said it all year long. And their problems were exposed at the worst possible time. And sometimes you just got to tip your cap and say, well, it ain't going to happen this year. Move on.
Let me go to the offensive side of the football. For the majority of our show, we've talked about the lack of an offensive identity. Do they have an identity crisis on that offensive side of the football?
Yeah, a little bit of one, because more or less what they've done is a small step forward from last year rather than a giant leap. And I think that is a little disappointing because, for the most part, Alabama's offense is the Cam Newton-Auburn offense of 2010. I mean, there's a few wrinkles here and there, but it's the same thing without a downfield passing attack that's consistent. You saw maybe the last half of the season some things sort of open up, but I don't think that they trust any receiver other than Calvin Ridley. And once teams realize that, Cam Sims and Foster and Smith and some of these other guys, they're good, but they're not going to do anything. They're not going to be, any real threat, other than Calvin Ridley. People just started locking down Calvin Ridley and said, okay, Jalen, go beat us somewhere else in the passing game. And Alabama can't do that. Like they just can't do that. So, yeah, there's an offensive identity. I think a lot of it has to do with offensive line and wide receiver and not quarterback, because I do think that Jalen has that kind of talent to be a successful quarterback, but he's not getting any help. And I think because of that, you saw it last year with Lane, you saw it with Sark in the title game, and you saw it with Dable this year. The play calling is rather limited.
But Barrett, to go back, and I've said this a couple times, and I've had people that have choked when they hear me say this. Lane Kiffin was a college coordinator. He's used to working with quarterbacks who may not be strong in every aspect of the game.
Yes.
He disguised and covered up some of Jalen Hurts' weaknesses. I think Brian Dable, if anything, he exposes more of Jalen Hurts' weaknesses.
I tend to agree, at times. I don't think every game's been the same. I think at times he has done that. I think that let's be honest. He hasn't called plays at New England, but he was used to Tom Brady. And, not to slight Jalen Hurts, he's not Tom Brady. But, so, I think it does sort of take a special kind of coach to really get inside of a quarterback's head and say, okay, we have to make sure that you're doing things you're comfortable with, and how do we do that without exposing you or the offense? And Lane was an expert at that. Lane did that with Coker. Lane did that with Blake Sims. Lane did that with last year with Jalen. And I think that doesn't get talked about enough. I remember me and you talking about the West Virginia game back in 2014. After that game in the press room, and Nick Saban was like, yeah, in the second quarter, we realized we needed to go tempo because Blake was comfortable, so we went tempo. That was Lane. That's what he did. And it's a different sort of game when you have an NFL guy coming in, because he expects everybody to sort of get it. And I don't necessarily know if they've figured that how to make that work with Brian Dable yet. So, not to say he's a failure. I just think that in pressure situations, and there were very few of those this year offensively, he's still sort of learning on the job.
But at the end of the day, you do see things that works. I think Brian Dable is a solid OC. I do believe in him. I think he's still learning to adjustment to the college side. But when they find things that work, it seemed like they go away from it. And it's just odd. It's puzzling that they'll find something like talking about up-tempo. They went up-tempo and was moving the ball, and then they go away from it. It's like I know.
Well, yeah, I think part of that, though, you got to give credit where credit's due. After the first drive of the second half, when they did have success on the ground, Auburn flat out took that away. And they realized, okay, we can't leave our defense back on the field against this Auburn offense that's moving the football. So I think, I know a lot of Bama folks were upset about, how they didn't get back to the Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris show like they did in the first drive of the second half. Auburn took that away. like that, and basically said, okay, you're definitely not doing that, and go find something else. And I think the problem is, and we talked about this before, the problem at Alabama is they're very risk averse. They've been so risk averse in their offense under Jalen Hurts that during the season they don't try things. They don't want to be put in situations where they're stressed, when in fact they really need to be stressed. They need to find out how these players handle things, and I think that's on Nick Saban. I think that's his, and he even said that was on him last year, that he was the problem, that he, maybe should have opened things up before that national title game, and they did it again this year. And as a result, when you got a situation like that, when you had a team like Auburn go out there and basically say, nope, you're not doing Bo Scarborough, Damian Harris, do something else, there is nothing else because they don't know what to do after that point.
Totally agree. Barrett, who's going to win, Auburn and Georgia on Saturday?
I think Georgia will. I picked Georgia preseason over Auburn. I'm sticking to it because the biggest thing is Kerryon Johnson. If Kerryon Johnson's limited, that game's not going to get sideways. And I think that game earlier this year was a lot closer than people realize. A wide receiver fell down. That prevented a Georgia score. There were other times where Georgia could have stayed in it. But it turned sideways because of Kerryon Johnson, because of his presence. He's the foundation of that offense. And so if he's not there or is 75%, I just don't know if that game's going to turn sideways like it did 3 weeks ago. So I'm going to take Georgia. I think they win it with a solid running effort, and Jake Fromm has a pretty decent day, and it's a low-scoring, rather ugly SEC championship game.
All right, so if that happens, obviously Georgia's in. Do you see a way that Alabama can go through the back door and get in this Final Four?
Well, TCU would have to beat Oklahoma. But if TCU beats Oklahoma, then what do you do with TCU, especially if they beat an Oklahoma team soundly? Like, how does it look? What do you do with USC if USC beats Stanford? And the third question I have is, what do you do with Auburn? Because if Auburn plays Georgia really close and loses, they earned the spot because they beat Alabama. Now, I know in years past you can say, well, Penn State and Ohio State and blah, blah, blah. I get that. Every year is different, right? Like, every year is different. So you would need a lot of chaos. You would need Georgia to beat Auburn just for insurance purposes. You need Stanford to win, you need TCU to win, and you would probably need Georgia to beat Auburn soundly, because can you really punish Auburn if they beat Alabama by 2 scores to earn an extra game and then lose it? I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you.
Barrett, that's why I think Alabama fans, I don't care if they pull, but they need Auburn to win. They need Auburn to win. They need Auburn to beat Georgia and beat them convincingly.
Yes. That is 100%. If Auburn beats Georgia convincingly, then you look at comparative opponents, and Auburn had a tightish game against Alabama. If Auburn blows Georgia out again, then Georgia's not very good compared to Alabama. That's the dots that would be connected, right? So then Alabama would be above Georgia in that pecking order. You'd still need some chaos, right? I still think you need TCU to beat Oklahoma, maybe in an ugly way, because I don't know how you're not going to put TCU in, but that's the one conference champion that the committee doesn't seem to love right now. I don't think Alabama fans need to concern themselves at all with Ohio State. They're not getting in over Ohio State. Now, I don't necessarily believe that should be the way it is, but that is the way it is.
All right, let me throw this, and I know I'm probably dragging you a little bit longer than I should through the interview, but let me ask you here, and I apologize, I went over the time is what I was trying to say. When Barrett, let's talk about where the college football playoffs would like to go, because I believe that there's an agenda at some point to get this thing to 6 to 8. Putting 2 SEC teams would push that conversation forward, correct?
Yeah, that would definitely, especially if there's a legitimate case by a conference champion elsewhere that is perhaps better than Alabama.
Okay, so maybe that's what Alabama fans need to live on, because 2011 Alabama LSU gave college football playoffs. Maybe they give them 6 teams. Maybe they give them 8 teams because
It's the same situation, right? Like, Alabama got into that title game, and regionalization is the reason we have what we have now. Like, that is the exact reason. So, I mean, yeah, that would the conspiracy theory aspect of it. If that's the hope that Alabama has, yep, that's it.
Well, I mean, it beats anything else we've got in Tuscaloosa right now, because we got folks. Listen, Saban got outworked. I mean, for 3.5 hours, he struck out against that coaching staff. And to be honest with you, what's it, 2 coaches on the defensive side of the football that have, if you want to call it fired or removed, or pushed on, whatever. I mean, they obviously outcoached their former boss.
There's no doubt. I mean, and I said this in my story after the game. That was a thorough outcoaching job by Gus Malzahn and Chip Lindsey over Nick Saban and Jeremy Pruitt. I mean, it was, and everyone will say, well, it's trickery. That like the reverse pass with Jarrett Stidham lining up at wide receiver, like that's just high school stuff. Auburn does that every week. Like, and you can almost call that play to a T when it's going to happen if you watch any Auburn game. So, like, some of that stuff, it's just, you got out worked, you got out coached, and there was no answer. And, I was talking about this on my show last night on Sirius XM. Alabama seems to have that game every year at some point. Like that one game where you're just like, what? Why are you not prepared for this? And that was it.
Well, listen, Barrett, when you go on in Knoxville, tell them that we endorse Lane Kiffin more today. We appreciate him more after watching Brian Daboll than we did last year. So tell them they should hire Lane Kiffin, that we fully endorse Lane Kiffin for Tennessee.
I fully endorse Lane Kiffin for Tennessee just because for content and for our jobs, that's good quality content.
Yes, sir, it is. Yes, sir, it is. Oh, me. But, man, listen, at some point this week, we're going to do a Lane Kiffin Appreciation Day. I promise you. We're doing it here. Barrett, I appreciate it, man. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, and congrats on the pick, man. You nailed it.
All right. Thanks, Ryan.